So I'm sure you've heard the phrase that what you resist persists. And I think there's definitely a lot of truth in this. And any sort of situation where we're railing against it, it seems like it just exacerbates our frustration and ends up just making the situation worse. And I made a video on this recently about 3D and not bashing on the 3D as a lot of modern manifestation teachings do, or seeing the 3D as your enemy, or even something that you just have to ignore until you get your prize, but rather seeing 3D reality as your ally. In other words, seeing all the conditions, all your experiences, even if it seems like something that's not going your way, seeing it as working in your favor. But I want to even extend this to thoughts and feelings. And there's a lot of talk in modern manifestation teachings about thinking positive and thinking the right thoughts and, feeling good. And even, I think even in law of assumption, there's this whole idea of, not being in lack, and where your awareness is on is what you're going to experience. And definitely there's a lot of truth in that for sure. And so the tendency is whenever, at least for myself, whenever, let's say, a thought comes up that says you're a failure, or you're never going to achieve your goals, or you're just going to stay stuck in this undesirable situation for the rest of your life. And so these voices come up, and so the natural tendency for me was to want to redirect it. And so it could be either saying a positive affirmation, saying something to counter it, just trying to think about something else, and not giving the thought our attention at all. And I think there's a lot of power to that, definitely. And so the thing is, it's not a one size fits all, either when it comes to the situation or when it comes to the individual. And I think different things, right, call for different responses. But I found that if it's something recurring, like if it's an emotion or it's a thought pattern that just keeps coming up over and over again, then I found that usually what's happening is that this thing, it's really a part of you. It's a part of you that's asking for you to acknowledge it. And really at the core of it, so at the core of these voices that I describe, like these voices, for instance, saying you're a failure, you're a disappointment, you're never going to achieve your goal. And so beneath that, there's a feeling of hurt, there's a feeling of pain. And really what it is it's a cry for help. And it's what they call in A Course in Miracles, everything is either love or it's a cry for help. And so these voices are crying out for help. And I found also that even if I'm feeling like, if I'm in a good mood or I'm feeling positive or productive or whatever, if I haven't fully acknowledged those voices and haven't fully acknowledged those emotional patterns, it's like this recurrent, this undertone, and it's this kind of feeling of dis-ease, and not disease but dis-ease, or this feeling, it's just this kind of undercurrent that's running throughout everything. And sometimes when we feel like we're stuck in this pattern, it calls for a different response. And so the other night I was laying in bed, and once again these voices came up. And so instead of my usual reaction, or instead of trying to drown it out by putting on one of Brian Scott's meditations, or just putting on some positive affirmations, instead I just told these thoughts, I said, thank you, I love you, I accept you exactly as you are, I forgive you. And forgiveness is not forgiveness in the sense that somebody did something wrong. It's not like in the sense of wrongdoing, but rather forgiveness. And this is something they talk about in the Course in Miracles. It's going back to, it's cleaning the slate essentially, and it's going back to the beginning, before you ever put any labels on anything, before you ever deemed this experience as being a problem. And so that's what it's doing. It's essentially, it's acknowledging it, and then it's giving you the opportunity to start from a clean slate. And I want to also acknowledge Ronaldo. I'm going to tag him in the description. He has a YouTube channel, but it's through his meditation process that I really began to, just find peace with all these recurrent emotional patterns and thoughts and feelings. And I talked about this before. I made another video on this before about saying thank you or I love you to these thoughts and feelings. But I feel like this is really taking it even deeper. Like there's a whole, he talks about there's a whole breathing process. And for anybody that's done breath work before, breath work can also be very powerful. And so there's a whole kind of breathing process where you breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. And somehow with the breathing process and with the acknowledgement, like when I did it, I just felt this peace wash over me. And it really started to take the edge off of it. And it was almost like, I know people talk about the inner child, and I always thought that term was a little bit hokey, but I understand what they're getting at. But it's like reaching to that part of you that's felt hurt, that's felt struck down, that's just felt hopeless, like just stuck in all these patterns. And it's really like it's like if you kind of look back at your life, you can see a line, you can see a trajectory tracing back to all the times that you've been rejected, all the times you've been disappointed, all the times you really went for something and you didn't get what you wanted and it just felt crushing to your soul. And it's like it's going back to that whole lineage, and it's acknowledging it, and then by forgiving it, it's like it's almost like it's wiping the slate clean, and it's removing all the energy, all the labels, all the attachments you've put on it, and it's telling you in a sense that it's just like another illusion that you've created. It's another falsehood. It's just another creation, essentially. It doesn't have any power over you. But I feel like in the past, when I know a lot of spiritual teachers say that, like they say it's just an illusion or it's just a creation. But somehow when somebody just says that, it's not always necessarily that helpful, right? Like you're like, okay, well, I acknowledge that as like an intellectual concept or an intellectual truth, but it still hurts. It still sucks to be in this experience. And so it's almost, in fact, this goes back to, I'm just remembering as I'm talking about it, a meditation from A Course in Miracles, where it's almost like you're reaching back to that part of yourself that just feels stuck, that feels lost, that feels hopeless. And so in the meditation, it's like you're imagining like all these dark clouds that you can't get through, and which our inner world can feel like that sometimes, right? It can feel very dense. And you're imagining God's hands reaching through those clouds and pulling you through to the light that you really are, and to the essential truth of who you really are, and pulling you through all of these clouds and all of this denseness. And so in a sense, by doing this exercise that I just talked about, the love and the forgiveness, it's like you, and I don't really like the word higher self, because for some reason, I just picture something above me and outside of me, but I like the word divine self. So your divine self is reaching through those clouds, reaching through that darkness. It's like you're lending a hand to that part of yourself, that just feels like it's in pain. And you're saying like, it's okay, I got you. And it really, for me, because I'm very cerebral, I'm very intellectual, very analytical, and it like finally allowed me to get out of my head. And even just like affirming, like I always kind of felt like it was just like in my head, and I was like trying really hard to connect with God or to connect with my God self, but there was still like a part of me that still felt like the small me, that still felt, yeah, that just felt doubtful, fearful, lost, stuck, in pain. And so it's like you're reaching out a hand, and you're I know it sounds so corny, but it's like you're giving a hug to that small me, and you're saying, you're not alone. I got you. And that's kind of too what I talked about, like when you rail against the 3D reality, really, because the 3D reality is really you, right? There's no separation. Inner and outer are one. And so anything that you rail against or you reject, really it's like you're rejecting a part of yourself. And then it just perpetuates the pain, it perpetuates the frustration. And so even in the past, when I would just shame and condemn myself, I would say, oh no, there you go again, thinking all these lackful thoughts and just keeping yourself stuck in this unwanted reality. And oh, you need to, and kind of like a coach, right? Like a really tough love type coach, right? Like you need to get back on your game and think positive thoughts, think about your goal, keep your eye on the prize. And yeah, sometimes that approach can be what's needed. But I feel like, at least for me, and maybe you're going through the same thing, sometimes a different approach is needed. And so really just giving love to all those parts of yourself, because it's all a part of you. And I feel like the love is really like the missing link. Love is like what integrates it all. And it's almost like what allows you to walk over that bridge, and that bridge that represents hope, that represents optimism, that represents faith, and leads you to everything that you want. And not just like in the strictly linear sense, like, oh, you have this goal of getting a bunch of money or getting your dream relationship or your dream house or whatever it is, and then it takes a while, but then you finally arrive at your goal, and then it's just happily ever after, and you just sail off into the sunset. But no, this is really just acknowledging that never-ending story that is our life, and acknowledging the human experience, that we're a divine being having a human experience. And in this human experience, we're going to have pain, we're going to have fear, we're going to have doubt, we're going to have suffering, but that's not the totality of who we are. And it's not the totality of who we are. We can still be our divine selves, but at the same time, we're here to have this human experience. And so we're not rejecting the human experience, we're loving it, we're accepting it, we're embracing it. And we're also recognizing that we are more than that. And that's what allows us to expand and the more and more of who we are. And it's like I talked about before too, with the whole idea of making your life story a masterpiece. And if we read any work of art that's considered a masterpiece, any of Shakespeare's works, or any of the great movies, like the movies that come out in the Criterion collection, and definitely like in these stories, right, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of suffering, there's a lot of tragedy, but there's an integrity to it. There's an integrity, there's a larger meaning, there's a driving purpose, and there's something really just beautiful that's like the glue that's holding it all together. And so I recognize that this was a bit of a tangent today, but I just want to encourage you that if you're ever in like a dark place and you're just feeling hopeless, and then at the same time, you're feeling frustrated with yourself, like, why can't I break this pattern? Just to try a different approach, and just to try giving yourself love and acceptance and acknowledging those parts of yourself that are just yearning to be heard. And I trust that, like for me, for you, that miracles will unfold. So thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.